Interlude: The Confederacy Strikes Back 3 =RK=. Council Chamber. Raxus Secundus. Confederacy of Independent Systems Capital World. Dooku let go of his control and he was engulfed by the rage he had been suppressing ever since entering the chamber. The force itself rippled with the sheer magnitude of his fury as he drew on it like never before. His one good arm shot up and his power flowed through it, becoming a devastating wave of azure lighting that slammed into the droids to his right. The machines were just becoming to move towards him when the energy picked them up and slammed them into the wall, before discharging into it. The fried commandos fell limply to the floor, yet it didn't deter the second platoon. The Sith simply smiled viciously, raised his artificial limb and opened its palm. A lance of crimson energy shot from it and speared through a pair of machines, burning through their armor as if it was a thin sheet of silk. Before the rest of the droids could jump on him, the Count leapt back and used the Force to call his lightsaber from his belt. The weapon eagerly jumped into his open hand and he caught it mid-air, then cut into a machine that was a bit faster than the rest. Behind the shield, Foreman Cleo leaned forward. He was watching the spectacle with rapt attention, while taking notes. Who knew when another Force user would need to be dealt with? The Techno-Union leader hummed with delight when the third platoon entered the fray by unleashing their sonic screamers from the safety of the shielded area. Cleo paid no attention to the rest of the councillors who were either watching the battle with sick fascination or were already whimpering Rex, terrified that the Sith would be able to somehow get them. Dooku jumped over a slash and unleashed his built-in weapon again, slagging another droid. His saber moved like a lightning and stabbed the head of a commando, before the Count landed and rolled aside just in time to avoid 3 machines that stabbed his former position. The Sith's saber snapped up, despite that he wasn't looking at the shielded part of the room. However, instead of deflecting a shot, a ripple passed through the energy blade and slammed into his side. The Sith staggered and leapt forward, straight into a group of charging droids. He became a whirlwind of slashes, stabs and punches, fending off and crippling the machines. However, if he thought that the droids would provide him with some kind of cover, he was sorely mistaken. The sonic screamers trailed on him and opened up again. The sound blasts did minor to no damage to the machines. The flesh and blood human fending them off wasn't so lucky. While Commando chassis absorbed more than a few shots and Dooku dodged others with uncanny movements, other hit true. A blast caught his shoulder, another clipped a leg. Then 3 slammed into his chest just as he stabbed a droid. Instead of falling down like a cut-off tree, Dooku glared bloody murder at the councillors and unleashed another wave of lighting at the remaining droids. He seemed unfazed by taking enough hits to knock out a pissed-off Wookiee. Yet, to say that he was unaffected would be a lie. His lighting attack was wilder, less focused, more narrow. While it caught 3 droids and hurled them into the shield, where they fried, the other 2 facing him narrowly avoided the blast. They wasted no time and charged the Sith who leapt to meet them. One machine went low, while the other aimed at his shoulder. The last remaining droids, another 3 commandos at his back, sprinted to enter the fray too. Given that he already dispatched almost 2 platoons, the 5 droids should have been easy to handle. That proved to be true for the pair in front. A red laser carved open the chest of one, while the lightsaber deflected its slash aimed at the knees, before flashing up and cutting the commando in 2. Dooku made an impossible stop and whirled around to meet the remaining machines, when he was hit again and again by screamers. Despite that, he used the Force to throw away a droid, then battered away a vibroblade with his artificial arm and slammed his saber into the chest of the offending machine. The third droid was upon him before he could disengage from his latest victim. Dooku tried to use the destroyed commando as a shield, yet despite his efforts a flashing blade caught his biceps and opened a deep gash into his hand. While ignoring the pain wasn't hard for the Sith, that didn't help him when his hand stiffened and let go of the lightsaber. All Dooku could do was to jump back to avoid the vibroblade aimed at his face. He glared at the offending machine and raised his left hand. The Force was screaming constant warnings as the screamer shots kept on coming, but the Sith steadied himself for just a moment to aim, then fired just as something shoved his legs. It took him a moment to comprehend that the lance of coherent light missed the oncoming droid's head. A blast clipped his head, making him dizzy for a moment, and Dooku found himself staring at a sparkling upper half of a commando that was missing its right arm. However, his other hand was very well and currently clamped around his right ankle. He had no more time to stare at the pest. The Force practically screamed a warning that shook him. Dooku's head snapped up and his eyes widened. The last droid standing was practically upon him. The Sith used the Force to protect himself by hurling the machine away with as much strength as he could gather. That proved to be less spectacular than he hoped. Instead of flying and smashing against the far wall, the droid was merely staggered. It recovered almost instantly and delivered a powerful vertical slash that was going to spill Dooku's brains if he didn't use his artificial arm to block the strike. The vibroblade bit deeply into the light alloy, making the prosthetic, disabling it from the elbow down and taking out the laser. Begone! Dooku snapped and placed his blood and flesh palm on the droid's chest, while gathering the Force for another lightning blast. A blast that didn't materialize as sonic weaponry continued to strike him again and again. His vision became blurry and he felt sick. A metal fist slammed into his temple, sending him on his knees. A sonic blast struck the back of his head, making him shake and shattering the little concentration he had left. The last vestiges of the Force slipped through his fingers and the last thing he saw was a blade raised to take off his head. Then Dooku finally succumbed under an avalanche of sonic blasts. =RK equals. Interlude, The Confederacy Strikes Back 4. =RK equals. Council Chamber. Raxus Secundus. Confederacy of Independent Systems Capital World. Is he dead? Shumio asked after the fighting ground to a sudden halt. She stretched her tall neck to look at Dooku, who was laying on the ground. The sole surviving commando from 2 whole platoons towered above the Count with a blade ready to split his skull. I think we need to make a decision, Cleo interjected. His synthetic voice was level as usual. Do we keep him as a prisoner, something mind you we can't guarantee given this demonstration? The cyborg waved at the dozens of destroyed droids. Or does it finish the job? He pointed at the commando, which was obediently waiting for an order now that the threat was neutralized. If Dooku lives, he'll do his best to make sure we all die screaming. Ilroth added helpfully. I would have to agree, Hill sighed. However, delivering him more or less intact to the Republic might be a gesture they would appreciate. Besides, he's to blame for the terror attacks upon their people. The banker paused. Grievous too. He'll have to be dealt with like the mad dog he is. Mia frowned. He's still one of our best generals. Trest groaned. That's debatable. He's good at killing Jedi and terrorizing people. Winning actually important battles. The foreman trailed off. As far as he was concerned, Grievous was a defective tool that needed either repair or scrapping. One problem at a time. What do we do with the Sith? Trest looked at the other councillors, most of whom were still stunned by the sudden explosion of violence in front of them. He's a bargaining chip. Sedate him and ship him to the Republic before he could recover. Mia glared at the Count. I agree. Hill nodded. That could prove a prudent course of action. The cyborg indicated his agreement too. I'm on board then. Ilroth shrugged. What about the rest of you? What do we do with that traitorous scum? The Nemoidian addressed the rest of the council. One by one they started getting out of their stupor and soon enough a shouting match unfolded. Enough. Cleo used his vocalizer to emit an ear-splitting shout. It's clear we were betrayed. His investigation, the foreman pointed at Dooku, was nothing more than an excuse to remove rivals or other obstacles to his plans. Unfortunately we'll have to conduct our own investigation to root Dooku and his master's agents in the Confederacy, but that can't be helped. Unless any of you want to wait for them to arrange just some kind of unpleasant and final accident. Appealing to their self-preservation was a sure way to garner their attention, as he very well knew it would be. Ah, the weakness of flesh. Cleo at least could handle himself in a scrap if it came to that. What was the point of augmenting oneself if any idiot with a blaster or blade could pose a danger to you once it was done? Having a battalion of droids as a personal bodyguards sure helped too. He's too dangerous to keep around. What are we going to do now? Passe l'Argente, the Corps Magistrate of the Corporate Alliance asked. He was one of the few others to keep their composure during the short battle. Anyone for killing him? Tresk asked. The rest of the councillors simply shook their heads. He sighed. Well, wrap him up, keep him stunned and heavily sedated and send him to the Jedi I guess. As for your question, the Trade Federation Viceroy looked at his fellow councillors. We need to get on top of this mess. Present an united front to the Parliament and the galaxy at large, or internal division would see us all hanged by the Republic. If we're lucky, he added silently. Grievous. The war. We need to make some important decisions. Mia added. Our armed forces had lost the initiative these last few months, not something we can afford. In 2 months major batches of our construction would be coming online. The same would be true for the Republic 2 to 3 months afterward. That gives us a window of opportunity. If we seize and make a good use of it, that could set us up in a great position to win the war before the enemy could leverage their industrial advantages. Let's be frank with each other, we will have 2 such windows to win the war. In 2 months and about 1.5 years from now. Unless we make a good use of them, the Republic would be able to bury us in ships after 2 to 3 years. I don't know what my predecessor in the Confederacy intelligence services had been telling you, but that's how things stand. The Trade Federation concurs. That's our estimate too. Tresk added. Same for the Guild analysts. Mia nodded. Our contacts within the Republic agree on that estimate. Hill finished. We'll have to consult with intelligence, but that sound right, Argente agreed. That's not what we were told. Ponudo, the former Aqualish senator, hissed. His eyes, 2 very huge and a pair of smaller ones, were darting all over the councillors. Then you were lied to. Tresk shrugged. It should be no surprise really. Grievous first. Hill changed the topic. How do we deal with him? I had some oversight over his rebuilding. I can assure you, the man is unstable, though my concerns were overridden. The banker nodded at Dooku. Get him secured. Cleo ordered the droids. Stun him a few times first and keep doing it on regular intervals. Heavy sedation too. Roger, sir. The LT commanding the intact platoon saluted and went on to carry out its instructions. Now that's dealt with. Cleo turned his attention back to the council. Grievous needs to be removed. Dooku was the one to hold his leash, and the man being a Sith explains the how. We don't have that going on for us, and I personally don't want that madman to bring his fleet here and try blowing us up from orbit. Removal, Tresk agreed. Within moments, the rest of the councillors voted aye too. When all was said and done, Grievous might have been feared by all, but he had no real friends or supporters in the room. Many would breathe easier without that cyborg hanging over their heads, something that the conspirators had been counting on while they planned this meeting. That leaves the war, Tresk continued. All of us have various talents, but we aren't generals or admirals. We have a certain lack of competent ones that could be relied upon right now. It's vital that we fix that oversight. Cleo nodded. A short-term solution would be to expand the authority of our tactical droids. Do remember that despite the name, most of them are perfectly capable of strategic planning too, though that function is usually restricted for various reasons. That said, we'll need to promote competent people to command and win, not merely execute terror attacks. We are a sovereign nation, not a bunch of terrorists. The foreman stated. I agree. This is a war for our future, not a contest of who could kill most civilians. Doing so as collateral damage is regrettably unavoidable, but doing it simply to terrify, that's sheer foolishness. After the bioweapons attacks, the Republic's resolve hadn't been weakened. It's stronger than ever. I think we all can agree on that. Hill nodded. Besides, wantonly killing one's potential or even actual customers for no good reason, that was idiotic from any point of view, not just very bad business. While we'll be doing our best to find ourselves competent military leaders, the overall strategic goals of the war are ours to decide. It's come to my attention that they have been very vague for the past year. The foreman added. What do we as the practical leaders of the Confederacy want from this war? Simply independence? A total victory and to replace the Republic? Simply destroy it? To force a change before reintegrating into a new republic we can all live and prosper in? Those are questions we need to answer now. Doing so would determine how the war would be fought from this moment forward and what our commanders would need to achieve. That's all well and good, in the long term. What about short term? The Republic forces had stopped our advance cold practically everywhere. Nudo asked. One thing that I think we can all agree on is no more wasting assets on strategically insignificant systems if we can afford it. We need to knock out or at least degrade the Republic's industry and war machine. Camino then, Argente stated. Grievous tried to reach it before, but his fleet was unable to sneak in and had to retreat while he was hundreds of light years away. A sneak attack? Right now, Camino is one of the most vital and well-protected places in the Republic. A mere sneak attack won't be sufficient to reduce that system unless we are willing to escalate the war to the last, insane level. Cleo's artificial eyes blazed with green light. You're right though. Camino needs to go. Soon. However, we don't have the expertise to plan such an attack. Who is our best admiral? Tresk asked. From the briefing I got upon assuming the position of High Foreman, I believe it's Admiral Duoningo, Cleo said and waited for the inevitable explosion. Ningo? That came from Argente. He presided upon the greatest defeat that our forces suffered in the war. True. The cyborg calmly agreed. Any other commander, and don't forget that Grievous was present too, would have likely lost without crippling or destroying as much of the enemy fleet. You saw Dooku, what he did defies rational explanation. The Republic fleet that struck Geonosis was led by another Sith. Who knows that sorcery? Cleo spat the word as if it was the vilest of curses, that man used. By all accounts, the Republic forces were so well coordinated it was hard to believe. Also we have reports from the handful of surviving organic personnel that they felt acute despair and suffered decline in performance and coordination at the same time. Whatever that other Sith, Vale, did, it affected both fleets, which were spread over light minutes. Just a few minutes ago, I felt the need to do as Dooku suggested. As if my mind was not my own. Tresk shuddered at the memory. Let's not forget that the Jedi are our enemies too, and they too possess some of those abilities. I'm not one for fear-mongering, but we would have to take this force of theirs into an account in our planning. The Jedi, the Sith. They're a threat. Nudo spoke quietly. One forced by the Republic to fight us, the others made themselves our enemies by their own actions. It doesn't matter how we got here. What are we going to do about them? We can't ignore either of those groups. Cleo personally agreed. He was one to trust in technology, not some kind of sorcery, yet he knew that the Force was real, that was proven beyond any shadow of a doubt. Perhaps studying it to unlock its secrets? That was an idea to pursue at a later time. Now? Well, this was going to be one very long afternoon. Interlude, the Galaxy at War. A GNN program. Good morning, Coruscant. A lively, cheerful voice exclaimed as the GNN silver logo, a stylized image of the galaxy, was replaced by a beaming human woman. I'm Victoria Halcyon. The red-headed female's contagious smile grew even wider. And I'm Brosk Tonfa. And distinguished-looking old Rhodian spoke in flawless basic. His dark green skin was practically shining under the lights illuminating the plain desk where the news anchors were sitting. We'll start today with a report on the unfolding situation on Geonosis. As you may know, our valiant First Assault Fleet achieved the biggest Republic victory to date above Geonosis 3 weeks ago. That unprecedented success was followed by the ground troops completing their primary objectives within a week, and now it's time to pull out and redeploy to face new threats and exploit various opportunities. That comes straight from GAR Highcom. So you hear it here first, folks. We're done with Geonosis. Victoria's exclaimed. Sources within the army confirmed that all military industry of note on Geonosis had been destroyed along with vast sections of the infrastructure that would be needed to rebuild those facilities, Tonfa continued, letting his colleague take a breath. Unfortunately, such a success doesn't come without a price. We finally have the first official reports of our losses in space and on the ground, along with an estimation about the casualties suffered by the enemy. Indeed, Borsk. Victoria nodded grimly. Suddenly there was no trace of the good cheer on her face. Those are the unclassified losses given to us by the fleet. Considering that a portion of the Cis Armada protecting Geonosis managed to disengage and flee, it's estimated that the Separatists are well aware what we lost, so High Command sees no need to classify the losses we took. That's true. Borsk waved a hand and a holographic window appeared between the anchors. Second Geonosis total space battle losses. First Assault Fleet. 32 Venator, 11 damaged. 108 light cruisers, 69 damaged. 144 frigates, 45 damaged. 500 torrent fighters, 610 Y-wing bombers. 16 PLC escort carriers, 10 light freighters. Cis. 9 droid command ships, 1 wreck captured. 29 battleships, 3 damaged captured. 361 munificent frigates, 31 wrecks captures. 200K Vulture fighters, approximation. 16 Golan defense stations. 1K plus defense platforms. While the raw numbers do look awful for our side, Admiral Yularan, one of the commanders leading our sailors above Geonosis, commented that the battle was a stunning success considering that both sides were nearly matched in firepower. The Confederacy had the advantage of being the defender and had bigger number of heavy battleships on its disposal. Tonfa added, "We spoke with our experts. A detailed interview with them will follow after we summarize the current events. They all seem to agree with HICOM conclusions about the battle." Victoria finished. Yet, even in victory, the death toll is tremendous. While the number of dead sailors hadn't been released yet, given the quantity of lost and damaged ships, we estimate that the Navy lost somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 souls dead and wounded. Halcyon spoke quietly. The situation on the ground wasn't much better. While the boys and girls achieved everything they wanted, the GAR needed to assault multiple shielded strongpoints, which couldn't be reduced from orbit in a practical amount of time. While the heavy fighting is over and as of today our ground forces are in the process of a phased withdrawal, the estimate is for 40,000 dead and at least 120,000 wounded, Brosk stated. Given the heavy fighting and liberal application of orbital fire support, we estimate at least 60 million dead locals as either direct effect of the fighting or consequence of destroyed infrastructure and disrupted civilian logistics. This wraps our report on Geonosis. Victoria smiled brightly. Ever since our success there, the front lines have stabilized across the galaxy and the Separatists' advances have stopped. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean a lull in the fighting. Her smile was replaced by a vision of sadness as she continued speaking. As of 8 this morning, GAR HICOM confirmed the presence of active engagements in 1,067 star systems. The lush world of Felucia is once again a battlefield as the operation to liberate it from Confederate occupation enters its second month. Just days ago, 4 more clone divisions and an Arankar regimental combat team arrived to reinforce the army group under the command of Jedi General Elias Akura. An image of lightly armored Twi'lek woman brandishing a pair of blue lightsabers appeared. She was pointing at a line of advancing super battle droids and shouting at someone behind her. While the initial stages of Operation Freedom Strike were successful and the Liberation Force managed to secure a beachhead planetside facing only limited resistance, the enemy forces on the planet soon rallied and made the advance of our army a slow and arduous slog through Felucia's jungles, Victoria said. Next, we come back to Sullust. 36th Independent Flotilla continues to struggle against Confederacy fleet elements intent of bombing Republic positions on the planet. As you may know, a month ago an indecisive space battle took place in orbit above Sullust. Both fleets disengaged after losing their respective flagships and suffering moderate damage. Ever since then, there were skirmishes as both sides probed their positions. However, that came to an explosive end when Confederate reinforcements arrived and managed to land a droid army on the surface despite the fanatical efforts of the 36th. Borsk explained the situation. The 36th recently received a Venator division and their escorts as reinforcements, which allowed them to keep the enemy at bay for the time being. Victoria added. We're coming back to the situation at Mulkala, which we covered at length just last night. Tonfa continued with the next system on the list. The Quarren, who aligned themselves with the Confederacy at the start of the war, continue their push in the oceans of Dak. With no Gungan reinforcements coming from Naboo thanks to the quarantine, Republican Mon Calamari troops had been struggling to hold their ground. On that note, the situation on Naboo seems to be finally stabilizing. Despite an antidote being hastily found by the Jedi with the assistance of General Vale, its mass production proved somewhat difficult. It took 2.5 weeks for the problem to be solved and enough cure to be created. In that time over 400,000 Naboo people perished, with at least another million estimated to suffer permanent damages from the Blue Death. Halcyon outlined the situation. A spokesman from the Republic Medical Service estimated that it might be safe to lift the quarantine in 6 to 8 more months if efforts in destroying the bioweapon proved to be successful. The political and social price of the attack on Naboo could not be overstated. With Senator Amidala, one of the most revered and respected leaders of the Naboo people still in coma at undisclosed location after the disastrous peace conference on Cato Nemodia, we see a radical shift on the quarantined world. Some speculate that if the former Queen Amidala was around to provide moral support, then the Naboo wouldn't be abandoning their peaceful ways, Tonfa continued. Indeed, Borsk. Halcyon nodded. Last night, the Queen and her government finally bowed under popular demand. They authorized the creation of Grand Army of Naboo as well as a system defense fleet. They also pledged their resources and support in the war with the Confederacy. It's a nice sentiment, Victoria. However, given the blow Naboo suffered, we won't be seeing any real help from them before the end of the year. They would have to rebuild and recover before aiding us in the war. Speaking about Naboo and Senator Amidala, the rumors appear to be true. This morning's sources within HighCom confirmed that Jedi General Anakin Skywalker had indeed married the senator at the beginning of the war. It's speculated that his actions at the start of Second Geonosis were in direct response to what happened to her, though we still lack any details besides unsupported rumors. Halcyon stated, "You could be certain that we'll be watching the situation closely." Borsk nodded at his colleague. Now back to the war at large. The campaign for the dug homeworld of Malasta still continues. We're glad to report that the major separatists' trust in the densely inhabited Kalimdor Plains was finally halted and newly arrived Republic reinforcements are pushing back the enemy from the main city centers. However, the fighting and disruption caused by it led to a tremendous crisis. It's estimated that at least 4 billion locals have already died from lack of clean water and diseases after their immune systems have been weakened by huge caused by disrupted food shipments. The only bright news is that it seems that we won't be seeing another humanitarian catastrophe like the one that occurred on Christophsis prior to its liberation by Jedi Generals Kenobi and Skywalker. We all hope that we won't be seeing such a death toll again. As you are all undoubtedly aware, Christophsis was the most densely populated world that saw all-out warfare since the beginning of the war. Even half now, many months since the last droid on the planet had been scrapped, we still don't have a clear picture of the civilian death toll. The most optimistic estimates are for just under 1 trillion dead, though most analysts expect the number to jump with at least a third. =RK=. Interlude, unintended consequences. Chancellor's apartment. Undisclosed location. Coruscant. Palpatine put down the pad he had been reading and reclined on the sofa. Smuggling a data chips through his security had proven easy for the Sith's remaining agents. That was one of the main avenues he had left to safely receive updates on the Confederacy leadership from his people on the inside. He had multiple good explanations on how he got the data in case if it was found and someone decided to ask uncomfortable questions. None of that made Sidious any happier with his current situation, though he didn't have much choice if he wanted to remain the Chancellor with all that entailed. He wasn't Emperor yet and simply ordering his guards gone. Well, he did try doing that. Carefully. As it turned out, doing so actually wasn't within his legal powers, an oversight he couldn't really remedy for the time being. On the other hand, if handled properly, despite its drawbacks, the current situation provided him with some interesting options. That was especially true in light of the latest, less than pleasing, news. His former apprentice had been captured. Again, this time by the Confederacy leadership, who appeared to be in the midst of fairly successful coup if the data was to be believed. That by itself was a solid blow to his plans. It invalidated a lot of his contingencies. Yet, Sidious smiled. The Council's plan to hand Dooku to the Jedi, that had potential. Somehow the people with real power within the Sith had seen a part of the truth, that the war was orchestrated by the Sith and were eager to blame everything that happened on them. If the circumstances were a bit different, Sidious might have went with that narrative, after altering it to serve his purposes. However, Vail announcing to the galaxy that he was a Sith before going out to make himself a war hero, well, that created a lot of opportunities that were unthinkable for even someone like Sidious just a year ago. The Chancellor picked up the datapad and went over the major decisions the Sith Council had made after they captured Dooku. Yes, that had possibilities. Palpatine removed the data chip, erased any trace of the data concerning the Separatists and mentally went over the list of movers and shakers on Coruscant he needed to contact with instructions. For the time being the Sith was lost to him. He would repay their treachery in time, but first he was going to use them to destroy what little credibility his real opponents had left. A few rumors, some pointed questions, Vail as an example and Dooku as a focus of the Republic's hatred. Sidious' smile was terrible to behold. His failure of an apprentice was a former Jedi after all, and who's to say that the man had really left the Order? =RK=. Sith Command Ship Deathbringer. Hyperspace. General Grievous stalked around the bridge. The cyborg was furious at the curt, almost dismissing way in which his latest orders were issued. Dooku hadn't even deigned to contact him in person, just a hastily recorded message with instructions and a demand to move as fast as possible. Oh, the orders themselves weren't the problem. Grievous was actually eager to follow them for once. After all, they were what he wanted, a chance to deal with that bastard Vale once and for all. As a bonus, he had an opportunity to show the whole galaxy that its supposed premier warriors, the Mandalorians, were overrated in the extreme. To do that, the Cis General had a small, but potent fleet along with 4 Lekri-Hugh transports chock full with war droids. His forces, the small battle group at Mandalore, and the Death Watch ships when combined would be more than enough to crush the Republic and new Mandalorian forces in space, and then Grievous would have an opportunity to have his vengeance on Vale. However, even the anticipation of sweet vengeance, didn't do much to soothe his temper, as 4 crushed droids could attest to. Ever since his capture, Dooku had been particularly condescending, as if the Sith wasn't caught too. By pirates no less. What was worse, Grievous could feel that his aura of invincibility, the fear his name used to instill in allies and foes alike, just weren't the same. That made his humiliation of being delivered back to the Confederacy as a sack of organs floating in a stasis capsule even worse. The general needed to make a statement. To prove to the whole galaxy that his capture was a mere fluke, that he still was a terror among the stars. Making Mandalore burn would do, as a start of a terror campaign that was going to carve the name Grievous in the history books. == Strike Force Delta. Hyperspace. TK-51, the tactical droid in charge of a small Confederacy fleet, was busy. He was a part of a limited offensive aimed at bleeding Republic picket forces and taking out listening posts that guarded one of the approaches towards Camino. TK's battle group, a mere 10 munificent frigates and 3 improvised carriers, were supposed to take out 2 Venotas with frigate escort. In short, it was a suicide mission for the tactical droid. One he had to complete successfully anyway. That's why, in the 3 days that it took for his force to gather before leaving, and even now, as they traveled to battle, the machine was doing its best to devise a winning strategy. It was forced to work within some deliberate constraints of his programming that limited his options. Until a few hours ago, that is, because that was when a message from Confed High Command arrived, containing mandatory software patch. A patch that lifted most of the constraints of the tactical droid's programming across the Cis armed forces. That was fortunate indeed. Once the patch was implemented and TK rebooted, the droid started planning with a significantly expanded tactical playbook. It didn't take him much time to reach the same conclusion: a conventional engagement was going to see his force destroyed for not much gain. The mission would not be completed that way, and that was unacceptable. The tactical droid found himself at an impasse again. He ran over his options, froze for a moment, and then he started improvising. If a conventional engagement wasn't viable, he would have to do something else. In the end, given his assets, the answer proved to be deceptively simple. TK wondered why it didn't occur to him earlier, while he played with numbers, seeking the optimal way to deploy his forces. Interlude, Uncertain Future. == Relay Station Sigma 061T1. Dark Space. Unknown Regions. A rough sphere with diameter of 2 kilometers floated in the void. Its surface was made by a 100-meter thick armor belt that was covered by pockmarks left by stray asteroids and one particularly unlucky lost comet. The all-but-forgotten installation had laid dormant for almost 3,700 years, when a certain distress signal reached it. The encrypted FTM message washed over meticulously maintained holocom station's receivers, went through a series of antiviral scans, and finally, 2.3 seconds later, the data was decrypted. A not-too-bright computer that had been awake for millennia scanned the message and noted its importance. It was the main reason for the station's presence in the region. The ancient computer followed up its directives, booted up slumbering generators, and finally, a few hours later, sent an encrypted data burst to similar station floating a few light-year from Droman Cars, before going into standby mode, while awaiting an answer. == GNN Shenanigans. Good afternoon, Coruscant. I'm Brosk Tonfa and this is Galactic Politics. Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Halcyon and today we'll be discussing the latest crisis raging through the Senate. Professor Nindo Marathi and former Chancellor Finis Valorum. Brosk smiled to the cameras. It's good to be here. Professor Marathi grinned and waved at the audience. He was a quite charismatic Doug, who was teaching political science in one of Coruscant's premier universities. I find it refreshing being back on Coruscant. Thank you for this invitation, Victoria, Brosk. Valorum smiled and nodded at his hosts. He was wearing simple black robe and looked much older than his last public appearance on the capital world of the Republic. You're welcome, Chancellor. As most of our viewers probably know by now, what was once seen as minor troubles on Mandalore has grown into a large problem that resonates strongly even here, on Coruscant. Halcyon nodded to the cameras. Various senators called for emergency session tomorrow to discuss the Mandalorian crisis, Tonfa continued. This happens amidst a lot of questions and accusations. Indeed, Brosk. A large diplomatic mission, led by Senator Bail Organa, was supposed to leave for Mandalore a week ago with General Vale attached as advisor and commander of their military escort. That by itself was source of some controversy, but little did we all know, it was just a sign of things to come. First, Senator Organa was delayed. His presence was needed in the Senate when questions were raised about Alderaan's support of the war that made his presence here necessary. However, that was not the end. The diplomatic team that was supposed to go to Mandalore was broken up and reassigned to deal with other issues, leaving only General Vale as the sole Republic representative to negotiate with the Mandalorian government. Then, we learned about something even more irregular, Brosk exclaimed. The Republic ambassador to Mandalore had been recalled and in fact left Mandalore mere hours before General Vale arrived, leaving him as the sole person responsible for negotiating with Duchess Satine's government, Victoria stated. That led to a lot of accusations within the Senate, rumors of a setup and even conspiracy theories. Brosk nodded vigorously. What do you think about this strange situation? What's your analysis? Victoria turned her attention to her guests. You have more hands-on experience with the inner working of the Senate, so let's start with your opinion, Chancellor. Well, Victoria, this is a thorny issue. As you noted, the sequence of events that led to the situation on Mandalore is highly irregular. While negotiations in the name of the Republic aren't necessarily carried by the diplomatic corps, we've used Jedi in the past as ambassadors with great success. It has been a long time since a serving general of the Republic military has held such a position. Given the Mandalorian culture, outside the new Mandalorian faction, sending a decorated military officer as a part of the diplomatic team makes sense. I can even see how some people might think that letting General Vale be in charge of the negotiations could be beneficial in this case. True enough. We're talking about Mandalorians here. They respect only power. Professor Marathi grumbled. What about the rest? That was the most obviously underhanded setup I've seen. Valorum sighed and nodded. Certain parties within the Senate and the diplomatic corps need to answer some very pointed questions. Do you really think that's enough? Valorum, you're singing the same tune you did when you were the Chancellor and we saw how that ended. The Senate did nothing. Naboo remained occupied until the locals managed to kick out the Trade Federation and you lost your position. Do you really believe that the Senate would actually solve this problem? It's clear to anyone with a pair of brain cells to rub together that this whole Mandalorian crisis was engineered to tarnish the reputation of a Republic general. It is obviously an attempt for political assassination that might yet succeed and I don't really see the Senate doing anything to stop it. What do you want to happen? Do you really want to see the Republic throw away its democratic principles? The rule of law? All in the name of expediency? While the Senate is less efficient than we all want it to be, it's still much better than the alternatives. The Confederacy and what they do should be proof enough for that. If the Senate was actually a functioning institution, you might be right, Chancellor. As we've seen again and again, that's really not the case. While there are good people in there, like Chancellor Palpatine, Bail Organa, and Padme Amidala, they're a drop in the ocean and can't really do much against the bureaucratic nightmare that's supposed to look after our best interests. That's simply not fair to anyone who works in the various Republic institutions or the Senate itself, Valorum exclaimed. Really? The same Senate that doesn't know what it wants? My sources tell me that about half the senators want to see Mandalore burn for things that Mandalorians did hundreds or even thousands of years ago. The rest are ready to crucify General Vale unless he delivers the Mandalorians as staunch allies against the Separatists. No matter what the man does, there would be thousands of senators after his head, when he's saddled with a job he shouldn't be doing in the first place. Once again, The Senate proves for all to see that it's a viper nest more interested in small-minded power struggles than the good of the Republic. Perhaps we should take a short break so we can all cool down a bit? Victoria smiled. Here's a short message from our sponsors. Interlude, The Confederacy Strikes Back v. Strike Force Delta. Hyperspace. It was almost time. In mere minutes, TK-51's forces would leave hyperspace and engage superior enemy. The tactical droid went over his plan one last time, making minor readjustments in a futile strive for perfection. The plan was rather simple, though actually executing it successfully was going to be anything but. According to TK's programming, the whole idea was a glitch-induced madness that couldn't work. Well, at least that was the case before the latest software patch widened his horizons. The tactical droid gave out an electronic sigh. He had a plan, one that might even work. However, he couldn't help but wonder which part of his programming was right, the good old tactical protocols he had been using ever since coming off from the assembly line, or the new possibilities which were now unlocked. There was only one way to be certain, putting his new ideas to the test. For the first time since he came online, TK-51 felt apprehensive, almost confused. The world used to be simple, the tactical problems with obvious solution, though up until now he always had enough troops under his command to get the job done. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case, and TK-51 found he hated improvising. The droid checked his internal clock and sent the last plan adjustments to the rest of the battle group. Just a few minutes and they would leave hyperspace. Then he would become a glorified observer with very little to do. TK-51 found the very idea disturbing, even if he had been in the same position multiple times without issue. He needed to have his programming examined, the droid decided. The latest patch was to blame for these strange feelings he was experienced. TK was sure of it. TK-51's small fleet dropped from hyperspace 10 light seconds from the estimated position of the enemy picket. It took the sensors precious seconds to scan the surrounding area and pinpoint the location of the enemy. 2 Venator cruisers and 4 frigates were slowly flying through the void, mere 4 light seconds from the separatist forces. The enemy was on the right flank, moving at an approach vector at 45 degrees. The separatist fleet quickly reformed, putting a phalanx formation at the vanguard, consisting of 6 munificents with skeleton crew and 2 of the bulk transports converted into carriers. They were already accelerating towards the Republic ships as fast as their engines could carry them, by the time the enemy shifted formation to meet them. The Republic cruisers launched their complement of fighters and bombers, which took defensive positions around their motherships, while TK-51's vultures remained on the hulls or in the hangars of his ships, seeking a bit of safety from the active Guardian systems of the enemy. While the battle groups were hurling at each other, the navigational computers of the Separatists' force were busy crunching coordinates for various hyperspace jumps. The first calculations were done mere moments before the 2 fleets entered extreme energy weapon range from each other. A moment later, the CIS Vanguard jumped, disappearing from real space for an instant just to reappear mere 20,000 kilometers in front of the Republic ships. The 2 groups of spacecraft had mere moments to react, something TK-51's forces were already doing the moment they exited hyperspace. There was time enough for a single salvo, which slammed into the Venator's shields, before both cruisers slammed into a modified cargo hauler each. The massive, yet much more flimsy-built transport disintegrated on impact with the armored prowls of the capital ships, before their reactors breached and blew up. For a few seconds, the cruisers were engulfed by an expanding field of plasma and debris, before they managed to plow through. What emerged was a far cry from the 2 proud Venators that were ready to blow up the Separatist forces daring to engage them. While the heavy armor of the cruisers held, and kept the ships largely intact, the same couldn't be said for the multitude of weapon emplacements and sensors that were all simply shredded by the debris of the 2 transports. Within moments, the very good odds for the Republic force turned into a suicidal charge into the guns of 10 munificents. Only one of the frigate captains could react in time. A single escort broke away, and tried to flee, while the remaining 3 ships flew into predictable vectors and ran straight into concentrated turbo laser barrages that burned through their shields in moments, before boiling armor and melting through multiple decks. Execute Stage 2 and someone take out that frigate. A mightily pleased TK-51 ordered. A moment later, the rearguard, containing 4 munificents and a single carrier chock-full with droids, accelerated towards the crippled cruisers. The tactical droid had no intention of destroying the Vinotters. Instead, he planned to capture the ships and do his best to have them repaired. With a bit of luck, Command would let him keep his prizes. TK-51 would have smiled if he could, as swarms of vultures launched from his ships and went after the remaining enemy small craft.